Hello folks, welcome to our Mixed Media Moods for March. DeeDee here. I'm very excited to share with you this project that I have worked on. It's a mixed media collage or yeah, I guess that works, collage on a piece of recycled cardboard. So I have a lot of cardboard hanging out. I'm sure we all do. As mixed media artists, we really love it. And the color of the cardboard really reminded me of that beautiful wooden ladder that was in the mood board with the lights hanging off of it. It had that like really warm, rich brown to it. So I just chopped off a piece of cardboard and then I'm adding some gesso here to white out a space for me to work on. At this point, don't exactly know what I'm going to do, so I'm just having fun and experimenting and kind of playing along with my recycled piece of cardboard. I love holes and like negative effects and things like that in projects. So I thought, why don't I just punch a bunch of holes in this and then we'll play with some colors from the mood board and see what happens. So I'm using a crocodile and it has a 6-inch reach, which means if you like it'll get to the exact center of a 12 by 12 piece of paper. So it was really good for this project and I just punched a ton of holes in my cardboard. And then I got out these 4 yellows, and I will make a point to put the correct color names in the bottom. But I have 3 yellows. I think they are like azo light, medium, and dark. And then I have an ochre color as well. And really fun stuff. So I'm just layering them up here, lightest to darkest, and using a brayer on my sheet and on my piece of cardboard. And because I'm using a brayer instead of a paintbrush, I'm picking up that really delicious texture that the cardboard, because it's corrugated, the texture that it has. So it's really fun. And here I'm just drying my layers, and I do dry fairly frequently between layers so that I can move a little bit quicker. I have a little plastic cup and some gesso, and I thought that, I lost quite a bit of white space, so I figured at this point that I would go back in and kind of highlight those circles that I had already punched. There were a couple that had some like voids in the yellow paint because they were a little bit lower in that area from the punching, and so when I ran over it with the brayer, then the yellow missed it, and I was really liking that look that it had, like they were just like miniature little black holes or something, sort of sucking the color out of my project. And it's very funny because in the end, I don't even use that many of the holes. They're just a piece in the background. But at this point, because I'm kind of experimenting and going more intuitively or doing just like the things that I think I want to do, at this point I was actually highlighting those holes. After I was done with that, I did use some gesso and a palette knife to kind of scrape across my background and bring back in some more white space because I did feel like that I lost way too much white space by adding all that yellow. And I do want the yellow. I pulled the yellows from the mood board and that brown that I mentioned earlier. But I want some white space too. So here I have a stabilo and I am going over some of the circles and then activating it with water. And it's such a cool technique, and then the stabilo, once it dries, it's a little bit lighter than when it's wet. So, oh, and then I decide to try and smear them and see what happened with that. All right, so after everything's dried, then I come back and I'm thinking that there is still way too much yellow and I really want to block some more of that out. Plus, I wasn't really that impressed by the way the stabilo was looking around the white circles on the yellow background. So to kind of combat that, then I just added some more white. I'm doing some white out with it, and then some of my holes, because the paint was starting to get fairly thick, some of my holes started to fill in. So I just used the end of my paintbrush to poke those back through, and it's kind of a cool technique as well because then when I poke through the holes, it reveals some of the paint underneath, and that's cool. Now, because I had, excuse me, earlier used the white to highlight some circles, I thought that this time I could use some yellow and then they'll kind of play off of each other. So I have some of those white circles peeking through on the yellow, and now I have some yellow circles that are complementing those. And I did let some things dry, and then I came back in with my stabilo and I started circling both white circles and yellow circles, and then also just some holes all by themselves. And then I activated that Stabilo with water because it gets kind of a dreamy, hazy effect that I really like. Stabilo is one of my favorite newer tools that I've picked up from other mixed media artists. So it's very cool. And I decided, why not put a few more? It kind of adds more interest to the page, and it's bringing in some black against that stark white. Speaking of, I decided to get out my Zig pen and kind of do some sketchy little circles here and there. Not a ton of them, but a few. And then as I was looking at the mood board, I thought, well, why don't I just paint this girl right here on my piece of cardboard? So this is what I want to do. I want to paint more figures, girls and men and figures and silhouettes and children and adults and things like that. And I want to add more hand-done stuff. I love stamping and stenciling and all of that, but my background, you know, when I was growing up was as a fine artist. So I really wanted to bring back in some of those skills that I know are in there, you know, that I need to sort of tap back into. So that's what I did. I got the girl, I used her image on my phone as a reference, and I probably could have printed it out. That would have been a great resource as well. And then I got out some charcoal and I sketched her into place. And yes, she's a little bit off and she's not exactly the same proportions, but, oh, excuse me, but really, I was using this piece as a study and to kind of see where my skills were. I used to have really great skills when it came to drawing, and I missed them. So, you know, I needed to test it out. So that's what I did. I drew her on here, and I decided to use the charcoal because when I started to paint over the charcoal, then it would activate in with the paint and create kind of a cool shadow effect. So I have 3 colors of paint here, and just like I will with the yellows, I'll be sure to get the correct names in the bottom. And then I also pulled back in that ochre color. And I can't remember right offhand if it's burnt ochre or yellow ochre or something like that, but I'll get the name of that one too. But if you look in the mood board, then that statue girl has a lot of really great yellow depth to her. So I'm going to go back and forth between my colors, my white colors, and the yellow. Now I did prep. I had to go do something after this. I didn't get to do this all in one afternoon. So by putting my paint in that little plastic cup, I can just wrap it in styrofoam. I can wrap it in saran wrap, and then my paint is going to stay wet. Now, if you have a stay wet palette or something like that, it will work also. Just keep in mind, if you keep your paint in small containers like this, I love using a palette as much as everyone else, a paint palette or a, you know, a cookie sheet or whatever. But more often than not, my paint just dries out before I get a chance to use it. So by keeping your paint in a little container like this, or even something like a Ziploc container, or you know, something like that that has a lid that will close, then your paint is going to stay wet and you can keep coming back to it, and you're not wasting paint that way. So I'm going back and forth now between the 3 kind of Titan buffs and off-whites that I have there, and the charcoal and the yellow to create depth and texture, shadows, and highlights on the girl. So I'm just really focusing mostly on the shadows and highlights because sometimes if I look at a project or a piece that I'm drawing as a piece, like if I look at a tree as a tree, then my brain and my hand automatically make me draw what I think a tree should look like or does look like rather than what I'm actually seeing in the image. So keep that in mind as I'm working on my girl here. I keep going back to my picture, and I've just moved it off the board so you don't have to see it, but it's in the mood board. I just keep going back to it, and I'm thinking, all right, so her nose on the right hand side is very heavily shadowed, and there's a shadow that goes from her chin to the right hand side, and her hair, there's a shadow from her hair, and in her like little dress there are some wrinkles, and I need to paint them in, but suggestively, it doesn't have to be realistic. I definitely want it to look humanesque, but I'm again like testing where my skills are and trying to listen to my muse more. So just go for it. And I'm paying attention to folds and textures and things like that. I'm looking at the project more at now at this point. I'm looking at it more as a study of light and shapes rather than the painting of a girl, because it is the painting of a girl. But if I were to say to myself, I'm painting a girl, then I might instead say, oh, this is where the nose should be, this is where the eyes should be, this is how long her neck should be, and her shoulders should be this wide. But instead I am concentrating on shapes and values and shadows and darkness and light, and I'm painting that. Does that help? So that's why you'll kind of see me, I'm jumping around a little bit here, going back and forth, and I kind of paint in her eyes a couple times, and then I paint them back out because I'm not that happy with them. And in the end, I just don't paint them at all, and it looks like her eyes are closed, and it's fairly fun. So sometimes you just got to go with your gut and really do what speaks to you. So during this process, I am going to bring in some music, and I'm just going to keep painting. There's not much else I can say. I bring out the shape in the nose and the shape in the mouth, the chin. She's kind of turned down just a tiny bit, and I'll paint in the hair and things like that. So I'm going to add some music and we'll go from there. All right, enjoy. All right, now that the painting process is done, I have gotten out a fine line applicator, and it has a mixture of golden fluid acrylic and airbrush medium, and I am just doing some writing and just whatever comes to mind there, and then I did let that dry. Now I want to do some blackout, or in this case whiteout poetry. So I'm getting out a few pieces of vintage text that they don't, I don't even know what's on them yet. This one is from a little dictionary page, and then I'm going to kind of play with them and try to figure out some placement. And then I sit here and I'm kind of looking over these pages, and they don't really have that great of stuff on them, and it seems to kind of put a damper on my creative process here because it was going really well. And then I was looking at this page, and I found just a couple words at the top that I liked, and I thought, okay, I can really start a nice poem this way, and then I'll be able to move forward. So what I'm doing is I'm using a Stabilo to mark all of my favorite words or pieces that I think make a good poem on this page. And then I'm going to white out the pieces around it. So the words that I found for this page: metaphysical movement, her recognized view, ancient, dangerous, celebrated echo. And I thought that it doesn't have to mean something to everyone, and it doesn't even have to have a specific meaning to me. It just moves me, and I love the way the words play together. So I still had quite a bit of wet paint from painting my girl previously, so I'm using that lightest, like kind of like Titan buff color or light buff color. Like I mentioned before, I'll have the names below in the description. But that color, I think it's working well, and I'm kind of going back and forth on it, and I'm just whiting out for now, so I'm all right. I haven't really made a specific commitment yet, except to the words, which I do love. One of the things, when I run the wet paint over the Stabilo, it kind of picks up the Stabilo and dirties the paint a little bit, and then that area of the Stabilo that mixes with the paint is permanent because the paint's permanent, so that's cool. Then I'm trying to figure out how I want to fit this on my page, and I decide to cut it and make it thinner, and then I decide to cut the pieces apart, and I can't decide if I want to layer them directly on top of each other in that sort of big void of open space that's at the bottom of the first half. And in the end, I actually decide to just cut them completely apart, pull it all in. I do want to check out some different areas and see if they might be better for placement, but I'm really liking it in this sort of bottom right hand corner, even though it's a little bit closer to the middle than to the corner. And as I'm looking at it and kind of moving it around, I'm thinking that because I used that like Titan buff or off-white color, it blended in with everything else that was going on in the background a little bit too much. So I just got out some gesso, and because the page was already prepped with the first color of acrylic paint, it was really easy to work with and to just cover that kind of eggshelly colored paint with some nice bright white gesso. And it just creates a whole different look. It looks great. It's a bit sharper. I did let those dry. And then I decided to do a little bit more trimming from edge to edge so that the bottom was bigger than the top. I'm going to use some Yoo-Hoo to glue it down in place. So Yoo-Hoo is really great as long as you have perfect contact and you put it down before it's dried. Then it's permanent and you're totally good to go. I'm going to use a Stabilo and darken up around my words, my whiteout poetry, and it really blends itself well to the Stabilo that I've already used, to the charcoal that ended up being my main source of shadow in my girl, and it just is like a grungy sort of distressed feel, because once I have that Stabilo in place, then I just dip my paintbrush in water and I activate the Stabilo, and it creates this very cool, we mentioned before, grungy, hazy sort of mark making. I did decide to take that beautiful white from the writing and do a few more things. I circled my words one more time, so now they've been circled twice. And I put some dots in her hair. And on the actual statue, I believe they're like flowers or something, but it was all inspirational. And I took this girl where I wanted to take her. I feel like the shading on her face is way better than I could have imagined after being rusty for so long. So yeah, thanks so much for being here. Don't forget to check out what Jen's doing. There's one more artist live video, and it'll be based on this board by Yasmin. Please subscribe to me or and join my Facebook group. You can join the Our Mix Media Facebook group. Follow me on Instagram. There's lots of ways to get in touch with me. So I look forward to hearing from you. I'll be doing some Our Mix Media Moods minis soon, and I'll see you back here then. All right? Thanks.